I said in my heart, "Here are my convictions. What shall I do? Shall I be inactive and permit prejudice, the mother of abominations, to remain undisturbed? Or shall I venture to enlist in the ranks of those who, with the sword of truth, dare hold combat, prevailing inequity?" I contemplated for a while the manner in which I might best serve the people of color. As wealth was not mine, I saw no other means of benefiting them than by imparting to those of my own sex that were anxious to learn all the instructions I might be able to give, however small the amount. Prudence Crandall, a daughter, a wife, a teacher, a leader, a heroine, a pioneer who withstood storms of hatred while fighting for the self-evident truth that all men and women are created equal. Determined to help in any way possible, convinced that even her minuscule effort could make the difference, and it did. Unknowingly, she paved a road for history to travel upon and influenced the world we now know. On September 3rd, in Hopkinton, Rhode Island, a baby girl was born into the Quaker family of Pardon and Esther Crandall. When she was 10, the small family moved to Canterbury, Connecticut. Young Prudence attended a Quaker boarding school founded by Moses Brown, an abolitionist. In 1830, Prudence went to Plainfield, Connecticut, where she became a teacher at a school for girls. 1831, a year of change across the country. As Prudence Crandall began her journey, in the South, Nat Turner led his infamous slave revolts. Slaves were rising up and opening the world's eyes to the future. Meanwhile, as the Southern men were battling, Prudence Crandall founded the Canterbury Female Boarding School. In 1832, a young African-American girl approached Prudence Crandall. Sarah Harris was a daughter of a lucrative farmer and had attended her district school. She now yearned to become a teacher and longed to complete her education.
Sarah Harris was very courageous. She was focused. She really wanted education so that she could teach other African American students and start her own school. She was the one that approached Prudence Crandall. So if she hadn't been forward enough to approach Prudence Crandall and ask if she could attend the school, then all of this story wouldn't have happened.
She asked Crandall to admit her to her school. After much consideration, with an open mind, Prudence Crandall agreed. However, even in being the North, the community of Canterbury was appalled. They fought against the admission, forcing Crandall to shut the school down for the year.
I think sort of the biggest surprise to anyone around her at the time was that her response was so just out of left field. I think in a way, when there was initially resistance to her taking on this one black student in her school, she just went completely a place that I don't think anyone expected, that she dismissed all these white students and then recruited black students from across the country. I don't think it's very unexpected, I think, for a woman at that time, maybe even this time, to go so beyond the bounds of the expected.
When she reopened it, instead of kicking out Sarah Harris, she threw out everyone else and made the school for black women exclusively, much to the town's dismay. She recruited middle-class African Americans from all over the Northeast. She gathered support as well.
And she was a groundbreaker in African American rights by starting a school for African American young women here in Canterbury.
William Lloyd Garrison, a publisher of an abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, released ads for the school. For the reception of young ladies and little misses of color. Terms, $25 per quarter, 1/2 paid in advance. The school reopened in April 1833 with 20 students. It taught reading, writing, arithmetic, grammar, geography, history, philosophy, astronomy, music, painting, piano, and French. The citizens of Connecticut were not thrilled. They fought and created the Black Law, banning the teaching of non-resident African Americans without permission from the town. On these charges, Crandall was arrested and put to trial. Crandall spent a night in jail. As she did, word of her case spread across the country. She was released from her cell and awaited trial, teaching all the while. The men of the town began to threaten, then attack the school. They even poisoned the well water. Prudence Crandall determinedly stood her ground, but this defiance caused criticism from the townsmen. The first trial resulted in no verdict. Crandall's lawyers argued the black law as unconstitutional and that black people had equal rights to everyone else. The jury was deadlocked.
But her attorneys were making the case that, based on the fact that non-whites were in fact citizens under the U.S. Constitution, and that their rights were being violated by this black law that made this school illegal in the state of Connecticut. And if at that time in the 1830s, if they had ruled on that, the case could have gone on to the U.S. Supreme Court, and 30 years before the Civil War broke out, they could have been forced to address that question. That didn't happen, but 150 years later in the Brown versus Board of Ed case, it was the same arguments that led to the unanimous verdict.
The second trial had her convicted. An attorney, Andrew T. Judson, claimed the law was constitutional because African Americans were not citizens, so the Constitution was inapplicable. This swayed the jury to vote her guilty. The third, with Connecticut Supreme Court, overturned the conviction and dismissed the case. The higher court said that there was not enough information to sentence her.
The black law did shut down the school, or tried to, but she was found not guilty.
But, even after the case was dropped, mobs of men continued to vandalize the school. In 1834, the school had to close for good.
I certainly believe she took a stand, and all of her students did, not just her, but girls as young as 9 years old that were here. The entire town was against them. They were against them from day one. They did things like poison the well, which could have made them all very sick. They nailed a cat to the fence. All of those people had to be very strong and determined in keeping the school open. Otherwise, they would have just folded and gone home.
Prudence Crandall eventually fled from Canterbury with her husband, Reverend Calvin Phillot. They moved to Illinois, where Crandall continued to advocate for women's rights and racial equality. She even opened a small school in her home. In 1886, the state of Connecticut gave her a $400 annual pension for the suffering they inflicted upon her. She later moved to Kansas with her brother, Hezekiah. Prudence Crandall died on January 26, 1890, in Elk Falls, Kansas, but her legacy did not. Excerpts from her trial were used in Dred Scott v. Sanford in 1857 and Brown v. the Board of Education in 1954. Her school is now a National Historic Landmark, and in 1995, she was named Connecticut's State Heroine. Her whole life, a struggle to promote racial and educational equality. The impact she had on the country when she was alive and dead is unimaginable.
She opened up the whole process to getting equal education for African Americans in Connecticut. It was shut down pretty quickly, but it basically opened up the door to having African American students in a bunch of other academies, later on going to like Norwich Free Academy or Bacon Academy, Colchester, and then it just continued from there on. In the nation, it was very important because it was one of the first civil rights cases involving education. So like in Brown versus Board of Education, they actually quoted the Prudence Crandall case.
One woman who persevered to achieve a goal unachievable in her time.
She was a suffragette, she was an abolitionist, she was an educator, and she was a woman that owned her own business in the 1830s, so she was really ahead of her time.
Prudence Crandall. A daughter, a wife, a teacher, a leader, a heroine.